Okay, I'm just dropping in. Today is Sunday night, October 5th, 2025. Tomorrow is the full moon. I saw her out there tonight. Very big, very bright, beautiful full moon. Full moon in Aries. It's going to bring a lot of things to the surface that we already are seeing, bubbling beneath. And it's hard to not get discouraged in times like this when it appears that all of the power is on one side of the scale. But things can change very quickly. And we know that the people have the power right now. We know that the fascists are scrambling. They're incompetent. They're ridiculous. And we will be victorious in the end. We have to believe that. Yeah, I'm just tuning in to some energy that's floating around in my field. There's this notion that whatever you like, whatever you see is a reflection of yourself. So if you see it out in the world, that means that it exists within you. And I think that this is partially true, but also frequently used to gaslight people into thinking that the problems of the world are their own and not, they don't exist independently from them as an individual. And like I said, there's some truth to it. There is the fact that fascism, war, genocide, these types of things exist on our planet right now because we haven't healed ourselves internally. And each of us can only be responsible for our own energy. So it might feel like there's no way that doing the inner work at times like this will actually help, because you aren't the one causing the problem. And to a certain extent, that's true, but at another level, we have to believe that enough of us are healed and are truly free from internal and external racism and other forms of trauma and subjugation, then eventually the world will heal as well. And that the world cannot heal unless enough of us do this inner work. And it can be lonely out here on the forefront of people who are the intersection of spiritually awakened and politically active. And not that I claim that I'm either of those things, but more so than most, right? More so than most. No Greta Thunberg over here, but you know, and I'm just trying to lead by example, right? And that example is being so deeply rooted in your own knowledge and having dedicated a large portion of my life to really examining and integrating these shadows of my own. The fact is that if you are incarnated in a body with white skin, your ancestral karma needs to be healed, because there are so many layers of internalized supremacy because of this. And we see this even in spiritual spaces, maybe even especially in spiritual spaces. But we can't forget the legacy of harm and violence that have been used to perpetuate our bloodline, right? All of the violence, all of the genocidal campaigns against the indigenous people of the Americas, all of the chattel slavery of African people into the Americas. We carry this legacy within our DNA. And I think that this is one of the most potent things, like frequencies that we can, one of the most potent uses of a tool like the Gene Keys, which is a very very powerful mirror to look at ourselves through by illuminating each of our prime shadows and the ways that we have weaponized our own traumas. And to do true and deep and real shadow work, and not to flinch and not to look away, right? When we see people with darker skin bodies experiencing trauma and being hurt, maimed, killed, abused, aggressed against. I'm just feeling into this message as it lands in my body. And so I'm reminded of, again, of the 3 layers of contemplation of the Gene Keys. And I think that this teaching is actually from the book, The Art of Contemplation. It's not in the Gene Keys source text, but it's from Richard Rudd, the prophet of the Gene Keys, right? And I use that word in the sense of being a mouthpiece for a message, and not in the sense of being a perfect human, because there's no such thing as a perfect human. And to me, there's a lot of omission in the Gene Keys source, and I can see that it can also be used for bypassing, as a tool of bypassing. And so this is something that I carry deeply, of wanting to use the Gene Keys as a decolonial and as a shadow, like exhuming a way of really unearthing our own, the ways that we're complicit in the intertwined system of dominance and control that is on the planet right now, and is what we are collectively trying to release and shake off. I think the last few days, so many things have come to light, from in my own perspective, of how all of these systems are so intertwined, interlinked. And it makes it feel like it's impossible to overcome, but the truth is, actually, because they are all so interlinked, if we just remove a linchpin, the whole thing will come tumbling down. And I think that we're closer than we think to getting to that linchpin. And I'm not going to say what I think it is, because I don't want to I want to keep this as an internally focused message and transmission, because if I name an enemy, others will focus on that enemy rather than focusing on the work that needs to be done within themselves first, before we can quote unquote defeat a quote unquote enemy, right? So as we look within ourselves, and as we kind of allow this this 3-phased process of contemplation, and I guess I didn't explain what that is right now. So the 3 layers of contemplation are the mental layer, where it's just an idea, it's words in your mind or pictures in your mind, these things that just like impressions upon your senses, and thoughts that are replayed through your head as you think about it, grasping the concepts, understanding it. the mental layer of contemplation is the first layer. And after that, we have to, the message, as you step away from the thinking mind and you allow the meditative mind to take over, the emotional layer of contemplation starts to come through. And this is where the feelings and the chemicals and the frequencies associated with the emotions will come up. So as I say something along the lines of all white people are complicit in perpetuating the racist system of capitalism, what comes up for you, right? You can first, those words have to come through your ears, or you have to read them. And this idea of all white people are on some level complicit in perpetuating the racist systems of capitalism. You have to understand what each of those words means individually, right, in order to get the idea. So there's one barrier. And then there is the emotional layer, which is immediately a defensive trigger that comes up. And this is where I think most people are stopped, are prevented from proceeding any further, because they hear that and they say, no, not me, I couldn't, and they get defensive about it, and they immediately put up these shields and won't even engage in it, because it stirs something too deeply in their emotional limbic brain. And it just won't allow them to even allow the meaning of the words to even settle in to their system. And the barrier here that we face here is the fact that most of us are running unconscious programs from unhealed parts, unhealed selves, traumatized selves, inner children, inner teenagers, inner babies, inner young adults who have been hurt and felt abandoned, or felt unloved, or felt unlovable, or anything like this. And we have to have compassion for these parts of ourselves, right? We have to take the time and sit with them and be present with their pain. Because when we are not present, when we stuff it down and we ignore it, we keep a stiff upper lip, it just continues to fracture ourselves into these various different parts that behave in different ways under different circumstances and do things that we don't even understand sometimes. And then we find ourselves, looking the other way when a police officer stops a black person leaving a store, even though we saw them just check out, or turn a blind eye to immigration showing up at the Home Depot parking lot. or, we convince ourselves that these are not our problem. And often it's not that we don't want to intervene. It's not that we don't want to be a bigger person, be a better example for our children of justice and doing the right thing. It's fear. It's fear that what we see being done to that person could then be done to us. And that's not unfounded, right? It's a real fear. But that fear is based on the illusion of separateness. It's based on the illusion that I am a different entity, that I am a different being than you are. It's based on the completely false notion that it's okay to harm somebody else because that doesn't harm me. But most of us are living too shallowly within our own systems to have experienced these deep truths of the unity of all of us. And that's by design. That's by design. Capitalism and kyriarchy, there's a word for you, kyriarchy, the male the patriarchal hegemony of Christianity. All of these systems thrive on a fractured and fragmented populace, a body of people who are fragmented and don't live in community and have limited access to each other. The nuclear family was an invention of the Romans. This idea that one man, one woman, and their children live in a house without generations and siblings and cousins and aunts and uncles and friends sharing a table, living in community. We've been divided and conquered, right? We've been cut off from our support networks, and we've been cut off from each other and ourselves. And then at some point, after we've faced these fears and, sat with the difficult emotions and allowed this contemplation, this notion to kind of settle into our being, eventually it will land at the physical level. And this is where it alters the very fabric of our being. And where it changes our behavior, and we embody the ideal that the contemplation was, that the contemplation unlocked, right? So with the example that we set out with of all white people are inherently complicit in perpetuating the injustices of a racially segregated and discriminatory capitalist system, when we have allowed ourselves to accept, and embrace this statement as truth, examined the ways that we feel resistance to it, and then examined the places in our lives where we have noticed this and seen evidence of this in our own lives, and we know that we have. we can embody it as a call to action rather than feeling defensive by it or choosing to stuff it under the rug and continue to sweep it away. We vow to do better, right? We still accept it. We still allow, accept, and embrace this notion in our bodies. We don't deny it, but we strive to do whatever we can to do better every time, every day. We choose, when we make conscious choices, we choose to make conscious choices from a place of justice, from a place of striving for equality, striving for equity, acceptance. And when enough of us get to that point, we win, right? They can't hold us down anymore because there are so many more of us than there are of them. And when I use the us and the them, I'm referring to us, the people who are everyday people, right? Working class, trying to get by. We have mortgages, we pay rent. We have, we have car notes, we have, we pay taxes. We worry about where we're going to send our kids to school, right? These are, I'm not talking about how you voted, though, of course, there's a layer of that, but I'm talking about all of the people of the planet. And then when I say them, I'm referring to a very small, very, very vanishingly small number of humans who are causing, who are actively choosing to make things worse, right? And I could name them, but that's not going to do any good, right? You know who I'm talking about. And the gulf between us and them is so vast. It's so vast. And it's easy to dehumanize them as well. But I think at the end of the day, we have to remember that all of this is, on some level, it's an illusion, right? It's a very persistent one, but reality is what we consider 3D reality is just one of many, many different planes of existence where individual conscious beings interact and spend time. And we it's just, this is the phase of evolution that the earth is going through right now. It's the logical conclusion of the Roman Empire. I think I said that last night. I think that came out. We've really just taken this concept of dominance and control as far as it can possibly go. And it's burning itself out. I have to believe this. I have to believe that it's burning itself out, because if I don't, then it makes me want to give up. So we can take a little tangent here on whether how there's, most people frequently like to judge beliefs based on whether or not they're true, and there's a more useful metric, and that is whether or not the belief is helpful. If it's helpful to me to believe this, then it's a good belief, right? It doesn't matter if it's provably true. It matters if it makes me act in a more ethical and aligned way, right? So when we're talking about us versus them, right? The people versus the powerful. We have to remember that we are all incarnated here on Earth to play a role, and that at a certain level, the people playing those roles, or the spirits, the souls embodied into those roles, are taking on such a huge karmic debt by their actions, that in the end, we will all owe them an enormous debt of gratitude. And I know that sounds bizarre and counterintuitive to say, but until we all face this internal struggle, this internal division between dominance and control, and cooperation and care, we need this. We need these stories to be playing out in the outer world, so that each of us can have the opportunity to make the decisions and face our fears and do the right thing. And I think that this is actually, I had this realization the other night that this is what the Antichrist represents. And I know that that's such a loaded word, right? But I want you to forget what you know about that word. And now take a moment to consider who and what the Christ represented, right? Or represents. We have this image of the Son of God, right? A divine being incarnated into human form, a human without sin, a person who lived such a pure and such a person who just vibrated at this level far above what anybody else where anybody else was, and just left this trail of inspiration everywhere that he went, right? So much so that 2,000 years later, people still are talking about this one person, right? Died for your sins, right? I mean, there's so much that we can say, but the idea of the opposite of that, or the opposite, right? The Antichrist, the thing that would be the exact polar, like, because everything has polarity, right? And all poles, all opposites are part of the same spectrum. And so when we look at these people, these humans who are doing so many horrible things and leading such terrible lives, leaving trails of destruction behind them at every turn, like have never done a good thing in their entire life, right? And yet they're embodying the worst of all of us, right? This, and right now I'm kind of talking about one particular person, and you know who it is, and I'm not going to dignify his name with voicing it, but he wouldn't have come to prominence if we collectively didn't have this shadow deep within ourselves. And so, and this kind of goes to the Buddhist practice of metta, right? Of like equanimity and forgiveness, and until each of us collectively, and I know this is where I'm going way out on a limb, okay? So I know, right? This may be challenging, but until each one of us can first sit with the depths of all of the horrors and all of the atrocities that have been committed in the name of this person, or any other person who kind of shares the same characteristics throughout history, right? Any of the dictator, archetype, until we can sit with the depth of the atrocities that each of these individuals have committed throughout history, and extend to them loving kindness and forgiveness. When we can do that, that's when we heal the planet. Because at a certain level, we know that these people behave the way that they do because they never got the love that they wanted at home, and they were never shown the right example of how to live. They come from deeply traumatized backgrounds, whether that's past lives or whether that's childhood, or and so if we can say, I see you, I see the harm that you have done, not that I don't hold you accountable for it, but we collectively hold you accountable and forgive you. Like, that's going to be the really hard work, right? Because if we just turn the tables over and flip the script and put these people into prison and torture them and murder that people in their name, and commit retribution of violence, that just turns the wheel of samsara, right? That just completes another revolution. And we're going to have to come here again and do this shit all over again. And I don't know about you, but I'm like, Earth is great and all, but it could be so much better, right? could be so much better if we could actually fucking enjoy this planet, if we could actually like live in harmony with the trees and the mountains and the oceans and the whales and the like the beautiful diversity of life that has lived on this planet. It might not be there for much longer if things keep going the way they do. Like, wouldn't that be so much better if we just had to keep perpetuating these cycles of violence and retribution upon each other? And this is the thing that I think a lot of white people, frankly, cannot wrap their heads around. And the reason that white supremacy is so difficult to unlearn and so difficult to unravel is because we collectively are so caught up in this idea that if we take the boot off of the neck of the people of color around us who we have done atrocious things to over the course of the last 500 years, if we stop, if we pause, if we even take a moment, that they're going to turn around and they're going to do the same thing to us, right? That they are going to essentially try, essentially like do the same thing to us. They're going to repress us. They're going to commit genocide against us. They're going to enslave us. They're going to torture us. They're going to rape us and kill us. And that fear is so deeply seated in every white person who hasn't done the shadow work yet that it's too scary to even contemplate the idea of embracing true equality and true kinship with people of all races, creeds, colors, nationalities, genders, orientations, whatever, what have you. But that's the thing, is that that's not going to happen. That's not what Indigenous people want. That's not what Black people want collectively. I'm not saying that there aren't a few people here and there that would, if given the chance, do the same, but by and large, that is not, like, especially if we look at the worldviews held by the cultures of the Indigenous Americans. They don't want to kill us and rape us and murder us. They wanted, like, when white people showed up, they were like, oh, hi, how you doing? You want to come hang out? Okay, yeah, cool. Like, we really can live in peace if we can let go of that need for violence and retribution. And these people who embody and incarnate into these roles in which they are the ones who are responsible for and perpetuating the most of these cycles of violence and domination and control are also a part of ourselves, and we really have to accept that before we can heal. And that's a contemplation that is going to have to make its way through the mental plane, the emotional plane, and then land in the physical plane. But when it does, you realize that You see them as toddlers, as the children that they truly are, and it becomes your moral responsibility to prevent them from hurting themselves any more than they already have. Right? If my 2-year-old, like, I mean, anybody who's parented ever knows how, like, at 2 she's getting better, but like at 1, at like 1.5, like these kids are just always trying to hurt themselves. They're always trying to do stupid shit, and I mean that doesn't really go away. It just becomes different, and that's our job as parents, is to prevent them from hurting themselves. And when somebody is perpetuating so much hatred and so much violence, it becomes your duty to embody the resistance to that as much as you can, while also carrying a deep equanimity and a deep love for the child, right? When I stop my 2-year-old from, like jumping off of something that's too high, she gets pissed, right? She's mad. And sometimes it gets me mad too, and I have to take a break, and we have to like both calm our bodies down. But I do it out of love for her, right? I do it out of respect for her future, not out of some sort of sense of justice or retribution, right? There's no I'm not looking to I'm not looking to create revenge upon my child for doing something stupid and hurting herself or trying to hurt herself, right? And for that same reason, I should not be looking to enact revenge upon anybody in the, like, any of these people in power who are acting in horrible, horrible ways, because they are just fucking toddlers who just happened to stumble into massive amounts of power based on their position at birth, and a sense of massive entitlement that got them very far. We need to stop them out of love, not out of anger or revenge. And when we can do the inner work to heal the inner parts of ourselves that feel the need to do that retribution, to enact justice upon them, and and breaking the cycle, right? We have to break the cycle. Not that they shouldn't ever see consequences, and not that some human beings are just not redeemable. I think that there are individuals that incarnate on this planet who as such are completely irredeemable, and many of them are probably the ones in power. But and more looking at the people down the pyramid from them, right? We have to embody the deepest vibrations of love. And I'm not saying that we have to be completely nonviolent, because I believe that is I believe Kwame Ture's quote about nonviolence, and that it requires the opponent to have a conscience, and that these people do not. These institutions do not. 2-year-olds also don't have a conscience, right? They don't have that concept of an idea of being a better person, or you shouldn't do that because it's wrong and it hurts somebody else. Like, they just don't understand. So right now, as we are sitting at this crossroads, as we come into this Aries full moon, we are each of us are going to be met with a choice that we're going to need to choose to take the road of love and to act from love, not from vengeance. Because as long as any of us still choose vengeance, the cycle will repeat. Not that violence cannot be enacted out of love, but it's greatly diminished, right? It becomes more like surgery and less like destruction. Yeah, that's what I want to say for tonight. I think just checking in to see if there's anything else that needs to be voiced. But I think that's it. I think that's the message for tonight. And so, good night and good luck.